Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Draft Sickos here on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. I am not Maxwell Baumbach. I think that you can tell that by the way that I talk and the way that I look here. But Maxwell is out just doing dad duty. I could totally relate to that. But don't worry, I'm not alone. I have called in for the big guns to help me out on this show. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Corey Tulaba. Corey, what's up, man? How we doing?
Steven, man, I'm so excited to be here, man. I feel like it's been a minute since we got to chop it up just like this, mano y mano. Before we get started, look, I want to officially thank you for your service, just so we're all clear, because I feel like we don't need a day for that, man. I feel like we should appreciate that just in general. So I want to say thank you.
Well, Corey, I want to say thank you and you're welcome for my service. For one, for a lot of people who don't know, Corey has relentlessly not thanked me for my service. Like anytime there's like this military appreciation day, and I've always appreciated that about you, Corey, because you share like these kind of like sarcastic things and just make light of it. And I think you get it because sometimes it can be a little bit awkward when someone will thank me for my service. Like I'm always appreciative for like the thought that goes behind it, but I don't really always know how to respond. You know what I mean? It's always like a weird thing. Oh, you're welcome that I work in the military, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, how's everything been going with you, man? I know people might not be aware of this now, but we just saw each other a few hours ago. We have a big project that's going to be dropping for No Ceilings. But how's the weekend overall been treating you?
Weekend's been solid, man. My basketball season has started for the team, the varsity team that I coach. We haven't had an official game yet, but we finished our last scrimmage yesterday, and let's just say over our last 3 scrimmages, we're about a plus 100. So I'm feeling pretty good entering the season. So I yesterday I saw Stony Brook versus Wagner.
There you go.
Real draft sicko type stuff.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of hoops for me, and I'm excited to, chop it up about some deep cuts, just, bouncing around. I know we both gave each other like 5 guys to fit some criteria. So I'm excited to hear your perspective on, a bunch of the guys that I chose, and get to tell you the perspective from the guys that you chose.
Yeah, man, it's going to be exciting. Like you mentioned, this is like the first time I was actually talking to my wife about this. She was asking about the show and everything. And I was like, well, I'm recording with Corey. And I was trying to recall the last time that we did like some one-on-one work together. And it might have been like, I don't even know if we did one last year. It might have been the year before.
Yeah.
On Draft Act. But yeah, I'm excited, man. And we got a great list of names, very in keeping with the Draft Sickos mantra that we have here. For everyone listening, we have a couple of surprise players. We're going to talk about a few returners that we like. And of course, we got to talk about some sleepers. But Corey, you came with the heat, man. So let's dive right into the first surprise player. And I don't know if surprise player was just another category where we can maybe talk about even more sleepers or maybe guys that we had expectations on that maybe even surpassed them. But the first guy that you wanted to talk about, man, was Malik Mack out of Harvard. And a name that both you and I brought up for the exercise that we did earlier today.
Yeah.
What about Mack has you excited about him this year?
Mack's interesting. I usually when I discover a player, or a player pops up on like one of my like stats based queries that I run for the stuff that I value from prospects. If I haven't seen that player in particular, I'll run through the film, right? And if I like what I see, I'm like, all right, cool, let's write this name down. If not, say maybe I'll revisit it if the stats keep up, because this was early in the season, mind you. But usually I'll text like Maxwell because, he's a sicko and this dude knows players on teams that I didn't even know existed. So when I texted him, I was like, yo, have you watched Malik Mack yet? And he was like, no. And I was like, oh, you should watch this kid because he is fun, man. When, he started out hot early in the season, right? And he was putting up these big numbers, and it was against like, inferior competition. I think there was a D3 school, in there, as a lot of these teams do, to try to warm themselves up.
Sure.
But then he started cooking against some of the higher level competition. The Boston College, the UMass, the Indiana. It's not his Harvard schedule has not been, a cupcake schedule. They played Loyola Chicago, and he just kept hooping. Like, he just kept putting up big numbers. So when I look at him, one, I love lefties. Who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Aesthetically.
This draft class is full of them, by the way. It's weird how many lefties there are.
Yeah. So, and he's just got the kind of playground style game that I love. Like, he's long, he's smooth, he's got like the herky jerky, he's got wiggle, shake, change of pace. He's just everything from a point guard, like, that he does on the court is what I like to watch. So he's just somebody that I think is super intriguing. Like, he played, in the Nike EYBL. He wasn't like, the star of the team or anything. He played with the Maryland kid. Harris Smith.
Yeah.
But now he's kind of got his own team. Obviously, he's a high IQ guy. He's playing at Harvard, right? So, like, this is a kid who's a smart kid, and he went to a situation where he was like, all right, like, I can get a, arguably the best education in the world, and also be the engine on the team to kind of show what I have as a star. And he is doing that right now. I know that there are questions about his size because he's about 6'1", but I think that his wingspan is pretty solid. Like, he looks like he's got really good length, right? And while he's not like traditionally athletic in the sense of you think he's like crazy bouncy, I do think that, like, he's athletic in a functional way on a basketball court, and it helps him, play in a way that he can use his athleticism. So he might not be yamming on somebody's head, but he has enough hang time in his jumps that he can kind of go like up and under and finish with craft. And, so he's got that. He's got like the shooting at all three levels. He's got touch on floaters. Like, I don't know. I think the kid is just like super solid offensively, almost everywhere. Like, he's got the court vision. He can make, he can paint the corner. He can make drop off passes. He can hit the little pocket pass off the roll. He can go over the top. He's really impressed me so far, and the numbers bear it out. Like, he's been incredibly impactful. He's been one of the, top 5 to 10 most impactful freshmen in college basketball by the numbers so far. So, big fan the minute I turned on the tape.
Yeah, I mean, me too. So I'll go through my notes here. Of course, I noted another lefty in this class with a big exclamation point at the end. I mentioned too that the herky-jerky dribble cadences that he plays with, lights out shooter from deep, can hit off the catch, off the movement, and the bounce, right? So if you're going to be one of these kind of sub 6'4" guards, it's helpful that you can shoot out of pretty much any set, right? I even noted that I would be interested to know what his wingspan is, because it seems significant. Like, if he sits in a chair, does his knuckles hit the ground? Like, that's kind of what I'm seeing. I think that he's got good vision too. I think that one thing that he has to improve on, and he's a freshman, right? So, I mean, a lot of these lead guard handlers have a lot of things that they can improve at, especially, at that age. I think that sometimes he can dribble in the traffic without really knowing what his escape route is going to be. And I think that might be, just a function of the team that he plays on, things of that nature. But I think that it's something that he could stand to improve. He seems just confident in everything that he does on offense. And you talked about some of the metrics that he has. He's in the 91st percentile per synergy on jumpers, 95th percentile in catch and shoots, 90th percentile in dribble jumpers. And that's on about 50 attempts already this season, man.
Yeah.
75th percentile in runners. Defensively, I'd be interested to see what you think. To me, there's not much to write home about either way. I mean, synergy has him graded out in the 55th percentile. I think he leaves a little bit to be desired, but I don't know how much of that is just because he does so much for this team offensively. Is he one of these guys that is going to take a couple of plays off on that end? Because I don't think that his closeout efforts are always there, but the thing that I did notice is that his effort did seem to be even greater against some of these more marquee matchups that he had, like say against Indiana, for example. I thought that his defense looked about as good as it had all year long. Do you think that there's a little bit of concern on that end? Like, where are you at with him defensively?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I'm looking at these guys, I'm not like thinking, is his defense going to hamper Harvard's chance to win games, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
thinking, what is his defense going to look like at an NBA level if he is a legit like 2024 NBA draft prospect this year, right? And right now, like physically, I don't think he's at the point where he can compete on an NBA floor defensively, right?
Sure.
I think that his wingspan certainly helps him, right? Like in that regard, because like we've talked about, I think he's got a really great wingspan. I think he's got quick hands. I think he slides his feet well. I think he guards with his chest a lot, which I like, but he doesn't have that strength that a guy like a Davion Mitchell had coming out of college, right? Where he could be a little undersized, but he's not really physically overmatched, no matter if he gets switched. Like, I think teams would abuse him on switches.
Yeah.
So there's definitely worry as far as like, is he ready for NBA minutes next year? Like, I would say no, but I think, if he's a guy that is coming out this year, he's going to be on an NBA roster. He builds up that physicality, gets in the weight room, gets some reps in the G League, and then, hopefully he's a guy that can step onto that floor because he can handle the defensive side of it and not get mismatched on a lot of these big wings that have, been drafted recently and over the years. And, now that's so many of them in the league. But at the end of the day, I think he's the type of guy, his offense has to be good enough where you can live with it. And I think there's a legit chance of that because I think he's a sniper. I mean, he's like 48 from the floor. Let's see, he's 48, 49, 48 from the floor, 86 from the free throw line, 48 from three, right? So like, It's a pretty legitimate shooter at all levels. So again, he's an offensive guy. Can he survive is the question right now. Again, I would be like, probably not. He dies on screens because he's not strong enough to get through them all the time. But I also think, like you mentioned, like because he is the engine, he's probably going to not go all out on that end. But I think that he's got a good frame. Like he's got broad shoulders. So I think that he'll get there. He's young. He's just got to spend some time grinding in the weight room a little bit, get stronger. He might not ever look, like he's going to be in a bodybuilding competition, but he could have that functional strength that will allow him to, defend on that floor. And given his length, I think that'll be enough.
Yeah, I'll wholeheartedly agree with you on that end. So I know a little bit about where you have this guy on your board, but let's just share it, right? Because I think you and I both think that he's got a very good path to the NBA, even if it's not this year, perhaps even next. But I have him kind of like in this 35 to 40 range right now. And I wouldn't even like cap that. I think that, if this kind of sustains throughout the year, maybe we see him in some postseason tournaments, NCAA tournament, or, NIT, something like that. Where do you have him on your board?
Yeah, I mean, my board's still kind of fluid. Like I'm just having guys in ranges, but I have him in that same range as you.
Okay.
Which I think, and you can let me know if you agree. I think a lot of that is like based on just the quality of players in this draft. Like I like a lot of the players in this draft, but I think like let's say last year's draft, like I don't know if he'd be in that same range for me necessarily.
Probably not. No.
So I think it's that's part of it. But in this draft in particular, I'm just kind of like, how many guys do I think could play?
Yeah. That's a
like
fair question, I think, in this year's class, man. And I think it's opened the floor to players like Malik Mack, who, I mean, I didn't have him on a board coming in. And I, just like all of us, we pride ourselves on the amount of depth that we will cover. I had hundreds and hundreds of players on my preseason board and didn't even know who Malik Mack was. And now we're talking about him already potentially being like one of these. He's obviously been a surprise, but what's the ultimate end game with him? I mean, I think the rest of the season is going to bear that out for us.
Yeah, for sure, man. And like, I really believe in his talent. Like when I clip somebody and I post them on like social or whatever, like I'm not trying to just be like, hey, who went through and had a good game in the box score last night and try to, highlight 1,000 prospects, because it's almost like if you're posting everybody could be a sleeper or everybody is, like a draft prospect, then is anybody, like I try to be a little choosy. And obviously like what I'm like, the whole point of this show, right, is to highlight a lot of the sicko prospects, but I think he's like the perfect sicko prospect because I think is legit. It's like he has shown this is sustainable, and it's not just like he got hot for 3 games. Like right now he is doing things that it feels like he can replicate because he looks so comfortable in what he's doing. So I have him in that 35 to 40 range as well, for sure.
Yeah, and you bring up great points, man. Like if everyone's a guy, then no one's a guy, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to kind of scrutinize and pick like the real gems out of it, which is what we're looking to do even today, man. So I think that wraps up our guy Malik. But let's talk about Otega Owe, man. A guy who I know that Rutgers a big fan of. I've heard I can see that you're obviously a fan of his as well. Obviously feel some type of way about him because this is the guy that I brought to the table, man. So playing out of Oklahoma, there's a few other guys on this team that I think that we were looking at for potentially being NBA guys, and Otega has just kind of like clawed and scratched his way into being like a real draft prospect as early as this year, man. So what has your overarching feelings been about the production that we've seen from him so far?
Yeah, when you brought him to the table, I was like, oh, cool. I'm excited to, dive into his game because this is a fun team that he's on, right? I want, there's a few different dudes. And then, so I started watching him a little bit, and then I went on my lunch break and popped on the No Ceilings NBA podcast, and Rucker started talking about it a little bit. I'm like, oh, all right, we got some fans here. But as soon as I put the film on, man, I was like, oh, I am all the way in.
Like, I love that.
Sometimes you look at a guy and how he moves on the floor, and I'm like, oh, he looks like an NBA player. Like he moves like an NBA player. Like there is a smoothness. There is a pattern to the way he gets to different spots. Like that are reminiscent of how NBA players get to spots. And when I look at like his frame and his strength, his physical profile, it looks like something that like he could actually step in and survive physically on an NBA floor. And I think that's so important now.
It's huge.
I went to see the Knicks and the Clippers play earlier in the year. And like I sat closer at the Garden than I had probably sat in like 20 years when my little brother got chosen to do like the halftime question thing, and they moved us down to the floor, and I got to watch Kirk Heinrich from the floor. So that rocked. But
legend.
Getting close at the Garden is very pricey. those New York City prices will get you. So, but I was sitting pretty close, and I was like, I cannot believe how strong Kawhi Leonard looks, how strong Julius Randle looks, how strong Mitchell Robinson looks, how strong RJ Barrett. Like all of these dudes are so strong. And to handle that physicality, like I think is such an underlooked sometimes part of like evaluating draft prospects.
Totally.
Otega has no problem with that. This dude is a beast, right? Like in my notes, I wrote, he looks like the football player at the pickup game, the way that like he kind of uses his strength on the court. But the difference is like, he also looks like a hooper. Like he doesn't necessarily play like, like the football player at the pickup game is like a little bit moving too fast and like can kind of be a detriment.
Just start the backpack off. Yeah.
He could kind of like, you might be like, hey, like don't hurt anybody, man. You're like doing these spin moves. Your elbows are flaring. Like, let's chill out. It's Saturday morning at 9:30. Like calm down a little bit. But he's smoother than that. But I love the mid-range pull up. Like I love the floater touch. I do need my guy to pull up from deep. I need to see the 3-point shot. Right now, I believe he's shooting 100%. I don't know if he missed in their last game or not, but he was shooting 100% on like 4 attempts. But like, I want him to pull up because I like the way the shot looks. Or I want him to shoot it off the catch, at least. He doesn't need, if he's not going to, punish guys going under ball screens, which he did make one. One of his makes were punishing somebody like that, then at least shoot it off the catch, because the way he moves downhill, like it's really impressive. Like he is really good. He has really good spatial awareness to like kind of get in between guys. So I love his footwork. I love his pace. Like he doesn't play sped up. Some of his finishes are like a little stiff because I think he's so strong, but like at the same time, I think he has a good finishing touch overall. He's comfortable finishing with his offhands. Defensively, I just, the dude's a beast. You know, he could switch because he is so strong. He kind of like, they'll put, sometimes when they're pressing, they'll put him in the middle and just let him kind of like play like free safety and you know, like a corner, and just try like, and those are the guys who, like, when you put in that spot, you know they have great anticipation skills to kind of pick stuff off. So he plays the passing lanes well. He's got quick hands, so he'll pick guys' pocket like with good length. Honestly, man, he gives me like Oklahoma City Thunder Kaysen Wallace vibes.
I love that.
Now Kaysen has more playmaking chops, or at least he's shown more playmaking chops, right? Like in college. But if you look at his kind of profile and the role that he's playing with the Thunder right now, like I can see Otega kind of playing that same role, given that he's willing to start taking some 3-point shots. Like I do think that needs to come around, but I'm buying it. Like this dude has been so impactful. I think he's been one of the best players in college basketball this year. He's still young. I'm in. I have him at 20 on my board. I know it's early, but sometimes you just see it and you're like, all right, I'm ready. Let's rock. Like, let's do it.
Jack Black, let's rock today. Yeah, man. I have him a little bit lower. I actually have him in the same range as Malik. But again, I'm not ruling that out. There's a little bit of me that's like holding on to some of the preseason rankings that I have. I'm not one of these, like, and I'm not saying you are either, but I can't burn all the ships right off of
for sure.
right off my 1.0. But the fact that he has come from being not in my 150 to now being in this like 35 to 40 range, that's a huge testament to the level of effort that he's been putting out. Like you mentioned, man, I have in my notes that he's a real NBA athlete, has a nose for the rim with or without the ball. I love just the off-ball effort that he puts in on the offensive side as well. Because what I love about him is like he makes the defense aware of him away from the ball, even though he's not really shooting on a lot. You know, sometimes we see these guys get ignored in the corner. You can't ignore him because he just makes such great timely cuts to the basket. He knows like how to get to his spots really well in that regard. Uses his strength and athleticism to finish around the rim and through contact. Love how strong his hands are. You were talking about the frame. He kind of wins all these 50-50 balls. And with Otega, they're like more 20-80. Like if someone is throwing you a cross-court pass, like, and it's high and you're jumping to try to catch it, Otega is more than likely going to come down with it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that he has like the best handle, but it's functional enough to where I think that in like this 4th or 5th prospect in a rotation, like it's good enough. And the thing that kind of worries me a little bit, which Corey, you being a coach, I would love to hear about how easily this might be able to get coached out, is that he gets happy feet really quickly on the catch. Sometimes he gives you 2 steps before he even puts the ball down. Could you talk a little bit about like how is that like something that people should be worried about, or is that like good coaching gets that out pretty easily?
Yeah, I think usually I think with guys like this, because I love the pace that he plays, but I think when that happens sometimes, it's like you just need reps to kind of let the speed of the game match where you're at. He's not a guy who played a lot last year. So when you're coming in this year and now you're getting major minutes, you know, sometimes you're still adjusting to how fast a closeout is or you know, whatever the case is here, right? Like typically if he's going to put the ball on the ground off a catch, it's probably he's attacking a closeout or whatever. So I think it's just like, hey, just let time pass and let him kind of figure out the speed of the game there. It's something that you'll see on film. You'll be like, okay, this is an area I need to kind of slow down on. and there'll be an emphasis on that. But yeah, I think it's a very minor thing if that's the kind of thing we're pointing out right now, right? Like, which is a pretty good sign, because like he's not really turning the ball over too much either.
Nope.
And so it's obviously like not like a super big deal. 1.5 turnovers, 25 minutes, right? Something like that. So yeah, I wouldn't be super worried about it. But like when I see that with kids, it's usually just kids who are like super athletic and like want to just go and just like rip the rim off.
No doubt. Yeah. And like you said, the fact that that's one of the few things that you can point out in his offensive game, and he is much more like these like complementary. I would even say, I think his defense is going to translate really well. I mean, he's 94th percentile on overall defense, has a 2.3 block rate at his size, which is stupid. A 5.3 steal rate. I think that he's going to be a great defensive playmaker. And like you, man, I would just love to see him shoot more, because I feel like teams are starting to kind of scout that initial catch away from the ball and attack the rim. I have him right behind Mac, dude. I have him again in that 35 to 40 range. But
yeah, I mean, look, I don't expect him to like continue to put up the efficiency he's at, but he's like, he's basically, how everyone's like fawning over Reed Shepherd right now.
Yeah, I know a few people that are really
rightfully
big Reed
so.
Shepherd fans.
Rightfully so.
Absolutely.
Modern day Kirk Heinrich. Give that guy a skin fade and a tattoo sleeve, and people are talking about him like Tyler Hero. He's got an effective field goal percentage of 72.4. He's got a PER 32.1, BPM 12.3. Like he rocks. So like I think he needs to be on radars. I expect those numbers to slip a little bit but like he also is playing to his strengths offensively and like doing stuff where he is getting downhill and going to the rim, and like I want those numbers to drop a little bit because I want him to start like shooting it from distance more, right? Like, but as is, like he's going to be an efficient, if he just continues to play the way he's playing, he's going to be super efficient.
Yeah, no doubt. And what's the saying? If you're shooting 100% from deep, you're not shooting enough, right? So we need some more volume from our guy. But hey, Corey, we're gonna hit this break real quick, and we'll come back with one of your returners that you brought to the table, who has been playing very well as of late. A guy who I think that a lot of us might have written off a little bit, but we'll talk about him after the break. Hang tight. All right, so we are back, and we are talking about the first returner that Corey brought to the table out of Texas. Used to be in his freshman class, was considered a first-round pick. Things have changed a little bit. Dylan Mitchell. Corey, I know that you got an opportunity to see this young man live, and sometimes live scouting can get the best of us, but I think that you're on to something a little bit with this guy. Talk to me about Dylan Mitchell.
Yeah, well, you know what? I never disliked Dylan Mitchell, I think, as much as like a lot of the draft world did, kind of like being disappointed by him last year.
Sure.
Not to say I was like super in on him or anything, because I think that just like he didn't look like confident in what he was doing all the time. But I think like now he's approaching the game with a newfound confidence and playing a similar game to the game he was playing, but like he's playing to his strengths and he's thriving doing it. He is experimenting a little bit, because while he isn't shooting the ball from deep really well, like he's attempting more than he attempted even all of last year. Like when I saw him live, it was probably the best game of his career. It was at Madison Square Garden. It was against UConn, so it was against good competition. Absolutely. He came off a pin down and shot like a fadeaway shot, like confidently, and knocked it down. He hit a couple of mid-range shots. I've always likened him to like Derek Jones Jr. Like that. I
think that's a perfect comp.
And so like, I think that he is a guy that at the next level it's going to be like, all right, well, are you going to get to play with like Luka Doncic? Are you going to get to play with a LaMelo Ball? Like, are you going to get to play with somebody who's going to maximize what your skill set is? Because I think that there's a world in which he can come in and be super effective. He looks strong. He has legit size. Like I was like, oh, he's a big dude. Like whatever he's listed at, that's legit. He was the best athlete on the floor, bar none, like easily. And like for as much as he's shown this year, defensively, I mean, he was guarding multiple positions. He was chasing guys around screens. He was banging down low. He was coming over and blocking shots from the weak side. He was rebounding the ball. And I think these are all things that he's been doing a really good job of this year for that Texas team. That, again, is probably, as far as the guard plays are, is probably not like guards that are going to maximize him on offense. Like Max Asmus is, a bucket guy.
Yep.
Tyrese Hunter, he looks for a shot a little bit. So
yep.
I think at the next level, there's still like maybe not more to be unlocked by him. Obviously, if he starts spacing the floor, at least from the corners, that'll be great. And I think, NBA teams will try to get him to do that eventually. But just playing to his strengths and playing as almost like a small ball five offensively, but also as like a Swiss Army knife defensively, like I think there's value there. And when I walked away and I was like, hey, like at the minimum, there's no doubt he's an NBA player.
Yeah.
And that's draftable to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you like your guy and you think that he can play, I mean, then why not just draft him? So, Corey, I'll be honest. I'll be one of these people that raises their hand up when they're out on a guy, right, and admit when they're wrong too. So, he just last year, man, he looked afraid to dribble a basketball, let alone shoot. You know what I mean?
No, I agree.
And I was just like, if you can't even do the whole 2 dribble and make a decision thing, then I don't care how good you are defensively. Like you're going to struggle to make noise. But man, when he came into this season, and not only is he dribbling, but like you mentioned, he's stepping into these mid-range shots with just utter surety that it's going to go in, and he's extending it to deep. At least the confidence. I don't know about necessarily the efficiency, but when he's gotten an open shot, he feels like he's going to make it, right? So that's a huge difference in the perception of him, right? Because then you start thinking about, okay, like if this guy confident on offense, are there things that we can utilize him doing on offense? Then this rebounding, which I'll talk about here in a second, then this defense is going to be able to be a weapon for us now. The catch race and rebounding radius that he has just makes for some of the most fun plays that I've seen so far in the early going of the season, man. I love that he competes so hard on the offensive glass, which, Corey, I don't know how you feel about NBA players, but not everybody tries, especially on the defense or the rebounding area. So that's what allows guys like these Derrick Jones Juniors and potentially even these Dylan Mitchells to be able to come into the NBA and make an instant impact with like being these kind of gadgety hustle effort guys. And effort is a skill. I mean, we see it bear true all the time. He's got that 9.1 offensive rebounding rate. He obviously is a crazy good weak side rim protector too, right? Like this 5.4 block rate that he has, he will levitate in midair, Corey. And this is things that we knew about him last year, but he will levitate and just kind of freeze in midair and wait for this shot to come from the offensive player who just seems to be waiting for him to come down, and it just never happens. He's got like these helium's legs, it's easier for him to float than it is to stay on the ground. I have him 51st on my board, and that is a massive jump from where I was with him coming into the season. I don't think that he's probably going to stay there very long. If productivity for everybody across the board kind of stays where it is, he's going to be an undeniable riser, man. So I like his NBA chances too. I even have in my notes, I wrote, is he Derrick Jones Jr.? I think that's a perfect comparison, dude.
Yeah. And that was like, even in high school at Montverde, that's who he reminded me of. Especially because at the time, Derrick Jones Jr. was playing from, my Bulls. So I was like, oh, like easy. I watch this guy a lot. Like I see the comparison there. The last thing I want to say about him is that one of the things that I noticed, he was also quarterbacking the defense.
Yeah.
Like he was very vocal in calling things out, pointing things out, telling guys where to go. So getting to see that up close, only being a few rows away from him, watching that action, that's the kind of stuff that I think is so valuable when you scout in person, because you can hear it, you could see it so clearly. And he was a guy who was doing a lot of that. So he really impressed me. And again, it was his best game ever when I saw him live. But I still think that in a lot of the other games that he's played in this year, a lot of that stuff has carried over, even if the scoring outburst, hasn't necessarily. I still think he does enough other things, like enough role player things that it's like, all right, this dude's going to rise on boards eventually. And, it might take a while because, like you said, people might have a sour taste in their mouth from last year and might be like, well, I'll go. I kind of know his game. I'll see him halfway through the year or whatever. Let's see what he's like then. But I think that his production is going to keep up. He has a major role on that team, and I think he's thriving in it.
Yeah, I mean, what does Draymond Green say? He's like, on an NBA team, there are like 2 stars and then everyone else is a role player. So the sooner that players can buy into that notion, the more successful they're going to be. And I don't think that Mitchell is going to have any issues with that. So likely riser on my board. Let's talk about another riser on my board, man. And I'm curious to see your thoughts on him. And it's funny that you mentioned that sometimes we can kind of keep a sour taste in our mouth for how a player looks, especially if we've seen it for multiple seasons. Let's talk about Harrison Ingram. A couple years at Stanford, came in as a freshman, was likely to have believed to have been a first-round pick by essentially everybody. Disappointing freshman year, disappointing sophomore year, transfers to UNC, has changed a lot about his game, man. What have you thought about the Harrison Ingram renaissance offensively in UNC?
I think it rocks, man. I think it's awesome that he's kind of evolved his game in one off season like this, and in what seems like a pretty tangible way. There was always so much to like about his game, right? And like that's why so many in the scouting community were high on him as a prospect, because it's like he has great size, he has great length, he had this feel that was apparent, right? And the efficiency stuff just never came together with him. But obviously now, like, he's knocking down shots at such a like high rate, and like I don't necessarily know if it's sustainable. Like I think is he shooting like near 50% or something from 3 right now, right? Like we're early in the year.
48%,
yeah, right. Like, but even if he is at 36, 37, 38%, like that's a pretty significant, percentage for a guy like him. I think a lot has changed on that UNC team in that he's also allowed to play. Like he plays a little bit more effectively in a manner that fits his game. I don't necessarily know if all of that is stuff that translates to the next level. Like I think he has been playing a lot in the post this year. And he's good there, right? He's super smooth. Like he's big bodied, and it really allows him to kind of play like Jokic, where he's making plays out of being on the block, right? Like he had a weak side corner hit at around the 11-minute mark in the second half against Arkansas that I was like, oh my God, that was insane. And he's done that a few times. So I think that you have to look at like right now he's almost like using the post stuff as a crutch, because like he's still not quick enough to beat guys off the bounce, so like he'll take a couple of dribbles and immediately turn his back, and like I don't necessarily think he's going to have the opportunity to do that at the next level. So but as a function of like, is it going to help North Carolina win? Like, I think it is. So like, I don't think it's something that we're going to see him go away from this year. The good news is we have 2 years of tape, and we've seen him run ball screens, right? Like, so we know that there are other ways in which he can make plays. He can make the pocket pass. He can, hit wraparound passes. He can, hit the weak side, obviously. He can hit the roller. He can do all that stuff. We've seen it. I would like to see him used as like a screener, and then get to make plays out of the short roll, because I think that's something he can be really effective at. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. But he's just shooting the ball so confidently. He's shooting it off contested shots. He's just letting it fly. He's making quick decisions. I think the form's always looked pretty good, right? But now it looks like it's honed. Like it's been honed. So I think that's really great. He's got great length. He's got quick hands. He's got the mobility. I still think he's slow on both sides of the ball. So like in that Arkansas game, I think that he really struggled with the quickness of like Caleb Battle and Layden Blocker and Tremont Mark when he got switched onto them. Like these are guys that were able to create separation against him. But I do think that like he was pretty like he can guard up because he is such a big body and he is so long that like he is able to switch up a little bit. Even though I think he's going to have trouble going down. Now I still think he's a little too like thick. So if he can lean out a little bit, he's always going to be somebody that's like a little bit bigger bodied. But I still think at the NBA level, he's going to need to lean down a little bit, just so he can kind of do a better job keeping up with those guards. Because there's so many good ones at the next level. But ultimately, it's like he's a guy. He just has good feel, and if he could shoot, and that's real, he's got positional size. Like he's going to definitely find his way in the league. And like I wrote, like I don't know, like can he be Kyle Anderson or something? Right? Like again, like a role player, but a guy who can kind of make plays and do things with the ball and then score a little bit, and hopefully maybe even be like a better shooting version of that in some ways. Not a 1-for-1, but similar kind of role. But I've loved what I've seen from him this year. I'm actually going to see him on Tuesday against UConn, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Dog. Yeah, you lucky dog. Yeah, speaking of Tuesday, my piece on him is actually going to drop that day. Yeah. Where I'm calling it the Revenge of the Returner, and it has a lot to do with what we've seen is that we think a guy, and then he shows up and he's completely different. Now, in preparation for this piece, and I won't go into all my details on him because please go to NoCeilingsNBA.com. Yeah, it's 100% free. Go check it out. One thing of note that I found interesting in my research, dude, was that he worked this past offseason with Brandon Payne, who is Steph Curry's trainer. Right. So I think that probably did a lot for his shooting motion cleanup that you mentioned. At the time of the piece, he was shooting about 48% from deep on almost 5 attempts per game. So decent volume too. So it's not like he's just like a 2 or 3 attempts per game guy. The shot is just completely transformed. It's quicker, cleaner, hitting it off the catch. He's shown a little bit off of the bounce too. You talked about the passing, Phil. I think that goes without saying, man. He's just always been one of these like high fill guys. Loves playing with his back to the basket, but UNC, I think, has done a good job in some formations, like some 4 high looks, Corey, where he'll be on the elbow. There'll be more players rotating from the opposite side wing to him where he can make a smart read or two. So he can do a little bit of that, but I'm glad you called back to some of the stuff that he did at Stanford. I'm willing to think that he can do more in other areas. I just think UNC, the way that their roster is constructed, he's just kind of limited in that regard. He is definitely more strong than Bursty, which can let him be left in the dust a little bit on these guards that you spoke to. But in that article, one thing that I've appreciated about his defensive effort this year is that he's pretty selective on whenever he is using like quick bursts to a ball handler. There was a couple occasions where against Dalton Connect where he just made like a really quick, smart read on the dribble that he was able to create some turnovers in that Arkansas game against Mekhi Mason when he's doing his 2 dribbles, trying to put his back to the defender so he can survey the floor and find the open guy. He made a smart, just quick run right at him as he was dribbling the ball and ripped it away. So some things that he's experimenting with that he utilizes his intelligence a little bit more, I guess, than his physical gifts. So it's nice to see him put that effort in there. I just think that with the improved shooting this year, dude, with the feel that we've had, I have him 48th on my board right now. Do you think that that's too far out of the question?
Not at all. Not at all. Like he's always had the NBA talent, right? Like so he seems like a guy that in NBA front office might be like, hey, like I think he can fit the system that we're running. He brings like these tools. He can play quick 0.5 basketball and knock down open shots, and he's like maybe teams are going to not think he's going to be like some starter at this point, but I also wouldn't rule it out like down the line, because I do think that as he continues to improve on his game, like continues to add new elements, obviously he's somebody who's going to work and try to do that. Like in this draft in the 40s, like like high 50 or, low 50s, high 40s, like I wouldn't be shocked if he goes earlier than that, like he's a familiar face to organizations at this point. It's he's a 3-year guy, and he, like, let's say he has a deep run. We've seen what NBA teams, how much they value these guys who are a little older and maybe can contribute to winning. And like maybe he gets selected in the first round, even I wouldn't rule that out either. The draft is unpredictable. And we're still early. So I don't think that is like crazy in the least, to be honest.
Okay. Let's get a little crazy here. We're gonna break a little bit. There's a couple comments, Corey. I don't know if you've been looking at the comments, but
Yes.
Russell Thomas asked, "What do you guys think of Ryan Dunn?" As much as I want to dive into this, maybe we could talk about it a little bit. How do you think people are going to respond to our latest project that we did today that's going to debut next week?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be our first mock draft. And I think if you check it out next week, you'll know how we feel about Ryan Dunn at No Ceilings.
Yeah, and it is Russell. We think very highly of him. I think that we can just. I think
especially
we just put
in
it
this
that
draft.
way.
Especially in this draft.
Absolutely. And then Dirty Dancer, who is I think a shout out on every draft podcast that I've ever listened to in my life. Dirty Dancer is a chat legend. He says, "Can't help but move Cody Williams back into the top 10." Corey, your thoughts?
I would agree with you. Cody's playing really, really well. He had another great game today. He looks huge out on the floor. Looks like he got stronger. Big fan of Cody, and I think that the way some of these guys have been playing in the top 10, like you can make an argument for him pretty high up given his tools and the way he's been playing as of late.
No doubt. All right, we'll get last one. So Kaiza Media, who made a lovely comment earlier in the chat about my mustache, which I really appreciated. The draft stash is very strong. He asked, "Do you guys think Edwards took a dip in the draft projections?" Corey, we had Edwards as our number one guy opening the season. Would you think that he took a dip in draft projections?
I would say he took a dip. Yeah. But what I'll say about it is I think there is a little bit of an overreaction because he did have this label as he was potentially number one guy on, in certain publications. But like, it's not like it was a confident number one, this wasn't Chet Paulo, Victor, type, Cade. Like he didn't come in with this. It was kind of just like, I don't know, I guess.
Yeah.
Like he's 6'7", I guess.
Just as likely as anybody.
Yeah. So, and like he's a guy that, like I got to see on the circuit like a few times last year, and his opinions on him varied wildly. I spoke to an NBA front office executive, and they're like, I don't know, like he might be a tease, he might be awesome, so it's kind of like let's let it play out. But I think he's had some good moments in college. He's obviously had a bad one. But, what I'll remind people of is, you can't overreact too much to flopping on a big stage, because I don't know how many people remember back to the Franz Wagner dialogue after his performance in his last college game, right? Where people were like, this dude will never be a shot creator and all of that. So, and granted, now I'm not saying that Justin Edwards is the same level of prospect as Franz is, but, look, if he's RJ Barrett and you get that in this draft at, in the top 10, it's probably a pretty good outcome, depending, especially if you get him in the 5 to 10 range. So I don't think we need to panic and start dropping him into the 20s or 30s right now, but he's definitely dipped.
I think that's a totally fair assessment. All right. So Corey, I'm gonna need your help on this guy who you brought it up as a returner. And I feel like I'm kind of in the minority on this. I'm no stranger to that. I think that you can relate to some of the guys that you think highly of as well, or some that you don't think highly of that a lot of people do, right? So I unfortunately, Corey, and we're still friends. I don't see it with Tyler Kolek, man. And I think I need your help on this, because I struggle like mightily in this area of scouting, where I think it's like a paper thin, like almost translucent paper thin. It's like a page cover, those like transparent page protectors that you have. Yes. I struggle to understand that page protector transparent thin line that there seems to be between a really productive college guard and an NBA guard. I don't think that it's, you might be able to prove me wrong here. I think that it's really hard to nail down like which of these guys go from being productive college guards, which there seems to be a lot, to being an NBA guard. And that's kind of like where I'm living right now with Tyler Kolek. Can you help me out, brother?
Yeah, look, I get it. Because he doesn't look like he should be an NBA player necessarily. For me, it clicked. I saw him at the Big East tournament last year, and I was like, oh, like this dude is like he lives for the moment. He's a baller. He's not afraid. So in the No Ceilings Big East preview, I wrote that like he was somebody I was really looking forward to watching because I thought that his season even last year went a little under the radar, and I would have drafted him last year had he come out. So this is a list from this is his numbers from last year over the course of the full year. He had a true shooting over 57, an assist percentage over 35, steal percentage over 3, box plus minus over 8. That list is Tyler Kolek, Steph Curry, Ty Lawson, Evan Turner, Tyrese Halliburton, TJ McConnell, Drew Smith, Nick Kalathis, and Alex Renfro. There's a lot of players who spent a good amount of time in the NBA there.
Absolutely.
So he's a guy that I think that if you're looking for somebody who is going to come in, make your guys better, compete his ass off, fit in with the culture, knock down open shots, play on or off the ball, run your offense in spurts, get guys organized, just not take anything off the table, then Tyler Kolek's a guy that you should look at for your team. Do I think that he's a guy that you should take if you're trying to like take an upside swing necessarily? You know, like no, right? But he is just a guy that like he's so damn competitive. Like he's probably just yapping all game, talking shit to, to his opponent, which is probably annoying because he looks like the, frat dude at the party that you just want to punch right in his face, like after he chugs a natty light or something. But
don't be just a natty light, dude. That's essentially water in the South. All right. So just be careful with that.
But yeah, well, where I'm from, it's a bunch of snobs who drink craft beer. So, it's fine. Nothing wrong with a natty light. He's just, I love him. I love his attitude. I think he's such a good playmaker, and, he's quarterbacking one of the best teams in college basketball, for another year. He's a lot of fun. It's a somewhat down class full of guys who at least are good at basketball. It comes down to is this guy good at basketball? So for me, I just think that he's going to find a role. Probably going to be a backup role, right? Like fill in as a spot starter maybe at some point. But I think that this is a guy who's going to be and play in the league for at least a little while.
Okay, fair enough, man. Yeah, and what I have in my notes is it's hard to ignore the productivity. I mean, 14, 5, and 5, shooting 50, 50, 85. This pretty good. Pick and roll machine, though. I think that sometimes you can look at a guy like Tyler Kolek and just assume that he's going to be a floor spacer, but he gets into these pick and roll sets. He and Oso have some incredible chemistry, knows when to hit Oso on the roll, knows when to kick it out to an open guy. Kicks it to my guy Cam Jones all the time, so I can't hate him that much. Shows a good balance though of knowing when to keep it. He's not afraid to contact either, despite being a little bit slight of frame. The shot is so quick though, man. I would love to see if anyone can register it on a shot clock, just manually by hand, how quick it is to get off. I do though. What do you think about this? So the free throw rate, as great as the players he in, is actually pretty low. It's a little deficient. I don't think that it's going to be enough to really deter people, but maybe that's just an indication of the type of player that he's going to be at the next level, right? Not a guy who's going to penetrate a lot, but probably just a great decision maker, floor spacer if everything hits well, right?
Yeah, which is weird because I actually feel like, he's a guy who likes to get to the hoop a little bit more often than he likes to shoot, which I wish he kind of would shoot and pull up from distance more. He was a guy who did that a lot early on in his career, and it's kind of dipped progressively every year. He was shooting almost 7 threes a game his freshman season at George Mason, and now he's down to 3.3 for the second year in a row. So, but he has a history of shooting it well, so he's very selective. I wish he would just kind of let it fly a little bit more often.
Yeah, no doubt.
The free throw rate is what it is. He's not going to be a super high free throw kind of guy, but he does still get to the hoop, and is not afraid to kind of finish around there. And as a lefty, he's pretty crafty and finding his way to get to the hoop. So I don't think it's a big deterrent. Again, I'd be more interested to see what he looks like being a little bit more trigger happy. Like he's kind of like Ortega in the way that like I just want him to shoot more, and punish guys more, because like I feel like guys kind of play him and go under a little bit because they kind of want to stop him from getting paint touches so that the defense doesn't collapse and he makes these kickouts. So I feel like they kind of test him sometimes and go under ball screens. And I would like to see him just be like, all right, now I'm going to make you pay on this every single time. So he really becomes like a true like 3-level kind of threat.
Yeah, and I think that the tools are there, and he's not shooting as high as a percentage as Otega Owe. So, I mean, Otega does have that on Tyler a little bit, but it goes back to the same thing. If you're shooting 50% from deep, you're probably not shooting enough, right? So I'll just put this out there, Corey, and then I'll kick it to you to get your answer. I have him 55th on my board, and that's me still just trying to wrestle the difference between really good college guard and NBA guard. But something tells me that if I had to bet money on it today, I probably put him higher on my board. Where do you got him?
I have him at, and again,
Or
like
range.
I'm even, because even looking at this, I'm like, oh, some of these guys aren't going to be there anymore. But he's around 28, 29 right now for me.
Okay.
He'll probably move up a little bit too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about my last returner. Now, this is a guy whose film popped on me on the rewatch. I just felt, when I'm preparing for this season, I was going through rewatching a lot of guys' film. Jalen Tyson, when he played at Texas Tech last year, his film aged a lot better than I thought it would, because I typically have a hard time with more athletic wings that, for whatever reason, they'll just give me like this vibe or this feel that they're not as crafty as I would like them to be. But when I watched Tyson back from that Texas Tech film, I felt like there was more craft there than I initially gave him credit for. So he was a guy I was monitoring coming into the year. And I'll be honest, I don't have him in a draftable range, but I'm just very interested in him. I want to monitor him throughout the year. A player that I think meets the kind of athletic, shooting, has the size, has the frame, has a handle that could translate to the NBA. I just want to get some more eyes on this guy and have some more dialogue around. I know that I see your notes here. What do you feel about Jalen as a potential NBA guy, man? Like, what stood out to you?
Yeah. So, well, definitely the size, and the length for, a guy who's kind of playing in like a lead ball handler, playmaker type role, right? Like he's got really good size for that. I mean, what's he listed at? Like probably 6'7", something like that, right? Like,
yeah, he's around 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah. So I think he's a good passer. His height allows him to see over the top. He'll pass over the top. I don't know if he's like super creative as a passer. Like, I don't know if I trust him to make like those super crafty, like weak side reads. And I think part of that is because I don't know if he's a super high feel guy. Like, I think he plays off instinct a lot. So like a lot of his playmaking is due to like what he sees at the last second instead of like manipulating a defense. I think he dribbles into the help a lot. Like, I think that's part of like the maybe, I don't want to say he has a lack of feel, but I don't think he has like the super high feel.
Sure.
But I think he's got a really creative handle and he uses it. He can create separation with it and take shots off the bounce. I think the shot looks better than the results. Because his percentages aren't that great, but like when it goes in, it looks really pretty. And like, he just doesn't make the shots, and you do have to make them eventually. And I don't think historically, like, he's been a guy who's made shots at a super high level like that. So, but part of the percentages too is he takes a lot of tough shots, right? Like, he's a guy who can shoot it off the bounce and take those shots when the shot clock's winding down. And that's also a skill too. Sometimes he like, I like his pacing a lot. Like, he moves really slow and then he'll get super twitchy. Then I'm like, oh my, like, that's super weird. Like, it looks like he's not a guy who should be that twitchy based on the last, like, how slow he was just going.
The frame before guy, right?
Yeah. Like, but at the same time, when he's around the rim, I feel like he struggles around there. I don't like, and I think like his touch is part of the issue with the shot, where it's like, oh, it looks good, but like, I don't know if it's like a depth perception thing. Like, the touch just feels off, even, around the rim or off the jumper. right now he's at plus 5.3 free throw attempts from this year to last year. So he's attacking the cup hard, and that's a good thing, especially to help him be that efficient type player. Let's see if that's sustainable, or if it's just noise because we're early in the season. I think he's pretty good on the ball. He slides his feet well defensively. He can flip his hips, uses his length to contest shots. I think sometimes he gets lost off the ball and like he'll let shooters get loose. I think he will get a cup of coffee in the league, but like you right now, like I don't have him in a draftable range. Like I wouldn't draft him, but I do think he's somebody that you can get on like a 2-way or an exhibit 10 or something like that. Like given how this is playing out right now, if he were to enter, this draft.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm living, man. So at the start of this year, like I was worried that he wasn't even going to be able to play. We saw guys like him and Aziz Badango out of Cincinnati get their transfer waivers denied. Luckily, first off, I just get rid of all of that stuff, man. Just like if these dudes want to move, just let them go play. That's just honestly how I feel about it. But going to Cal, immediate focal point for the Bears, like you mentioned. I love his ball handling and attacking nature. And for what that's worth, I do think that the uptick in free throw percentage or rate is going to be there just because he is like the lead dude and he is going so hard. I don't know if it's going to be like plus 5.5, but I think it's going to definitely be an improvement from last year. Just how I feel about it. I do like with the ball in his hands how he is like he's a pretty good ball handler and navigates around screens pretty well. Seems to have a pretty good knack for creating separations using his teammates, which really complements the rim pressure that he puts on. I think that he's pretty fluid and kind of shifty like you. I don't think that he's like necessarily the most fluid, like hyper athlete out there, but with the ball in his hands, like he's up there, I would say, and guys who I think have a shot at being drafted. I think the shot looks okay. Last year we did see him shoot 40% on a little bit lower volume in a more complementary role. So I do think that even though like most of the stuff is coming off the bounce now, I do think that if we see him in the NBA, he'll be more off ball and we might see it get closer to that 40%. If not that high, maybe kind of close to it. Defensively, I do like the block and steal rate being where it's at. It's a over 2 on both ends. I think that he fights through screens well. I think he slides his feet, uses his length to contest shots. Does have a tendency to only face his man in the help. So I know that you were saying like he can kind of leave his man open. It feels like he's either operating on 10 or 11 in the help, where he's either focusing solely on the ball or solely on his man and not so much in the middle of that help. Again, I was a fan of him coming into the year. I have him like in this 80 to 90 range, let's just call it. Because I think that, like you, I think he might get in the NBA. I just don't know how many teams are going to feel comfortable investing draft capital in a guy when there's so many other prospects that kind of fit that same size and mold, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. But, I think that guys who are his size with the ball skills that he has and the capability to knock down shots, like I think those are always going to be guys that are on the radar. And all it takes is like it to come together on the right team and the right situation. And all of a sudden he's a guy that like, oh, where'd this guy come from? Right. And how did everybody pass on him? So like, he's one of those guys where I can totally see him catching on if he like cleans some things up. And he's a guy that I do think because of his skill set and size will get a cup of coffee at some point.
No doubt. All right. So we're going to hit another break and then we're going to stick to the truest nature of the show. Corey did his homework. He's got some very interesting sleepers to talk about, but we'll hit this break and we'll come right back and discuss those guys. Hang tight. All right, Corey, you draft Sicko. You gave me a couple names, and Victor Lankin out of Cincinnati was the first one that you gave, and tugging at my heartstrings. He's like the type of big man that I think that I can fall in love with. So I saw, and just to kind of go back to something you mentioned earlier, when you clip somebody, that means something. You're not saying that everyone is a guy. So if you take the time to post out about a guy, like you're putting your reputation out there and you're staking claim in a player. I saw you give Victor some love on the lines. So what has stood out to you about him?
Yeah, he was a guy that was on my radar last year, but was not somebody that I was really buying into as an NBA prospect at that point, just because I didn't think that he did some of the things that were necessary that you need to do to be a big man in this modern NBA, which is so much offense is run. Like if you're not like the Derek Lively, like high flying, rim running, above the rim lob threat kind of guy, there is a pretty high bar full of skills that you need to kind of be adequate at as a center prospect. You need to be able to run DHOs. You got to be able to run to the rim, maybe pick and pop, make short roll reads. Like there's a lot of things that like don't seem super complicated on the surface, but like are hard when you put them all together and ask that of bigs. And this year, Victor Locken has improved on a lot of those things that I didn't see. So, you know, like in the clip that I had put a couple of weeks back on Twitter, he's been shooting threes this year. This is a new thing for Victor. This was not something that he did last year. He's already like, when I made that clip, he had already made more threes, I think, than he had attempted all of the previous year prior. He made 5 threes. He went in one of the games this year, 5 for 6 against Georgia Tech, you know, from deep. He's shooting it confidently. He's not thinking. He's just letting it fly. He made another one in his game tonight, which was a really impressive game. But, you know, he's shooting 47%, you know, right now. Obviously, it's not going to hold up. I don't expect it to, but he just needs to shoot 34% at the center spot for it to be like, all right, this guy we'll let him pick and pop. The other aspect that I think he's improved on that I wanted to see that I didn't know was the playmaking. You know, he averaged a half assist a game last year in 24 minutes. This year he's up around 2. He had 6 assists today. And what I loved about it was a real assortment of assists. So there was a short roll assist. There was a possession where he ran a ball screen where he was the 4 and he, you know, passed to the, you know, initiated to the 5. He gave some 1-mores. There was some high-low action. So I think he's hit the weak side corner out of the post, which is a big one because a lot of his, you know, what he does is going to come out of the post as well. So I think those 2 skills that he's improved on this year were massive for him as a draft prospect because he's so solid in a lot of the other aspects of the game already. Like you can go to him on the blocks, but you know, at the college level, obviously that's something that teams are going to do when you have a prospect like him, right? Maybe not as much at the NBA level, but that doesn't mean that when switches occur and you get a mismatch on a guard, that it's not going to be something that you do it all, right? So he can go to the block, he can finish with either hand, which I like. I love dudes that could use their offhand to finish with touch. So you know, the shooting, the fact that he can go in the post, he could set screens, now he can roll or he can pop. He can make plays a little bit, and that's something like it just seems like he put in a lot of work to give a modern skill. And then defensively, you know, I think he's a nice shot blocker. I wouldn't say he's like an elite shot blocking prospect by any means, but I do think he moves okay on the perimeter. Like sure. I think he's got pretty good lateral ability. Really good year-over-year steal percentage, so quick hands, good length. You know, if you want to see how he can move on the perimeter, he had a really, really great possession in isolation guarding Miles Kelly on an island around 12 minutes into the second half that ended up in a block at the rim because Miles Kelly couldn't really make much headway there. I just think he rebounds really well. He cleans up the glass on the offensive boards, cleans up the glass on the defensive boards to finish possessions. Just a solid big that does a lot of the little things well. So I've been impressed by him. I think he is a draftable player this year if he continues to, you know, shoot it well, shoot it at all, even and you know, continues to make plays at this rate.
Yeah, man, I just love how hard he plays. You know, he's very decisive in everything that he does, and you're getting maximum effort. It feels like anytime that he is involved in any play, has no problem finishing through contact, almost to the point to where it seems like he's like Mike Allstott a little bit from the Buccaneers, right? Like he's just looking for someone to run into. But he really complements it well, and I think that what makes him so efficient in the block is like he has a couple of different things that he can go to, and they all play off of each other. It's not just like two completely contrasting different moves. It's like a good wrestler, right? Like their finisher is masked by a number of other moves that they can go
Right.
to, right? He puts a ton of pressure on the rim, established deep position a lot. And I love the fact that you mentioned that he's just brave is the word that I wrote down. He's brave from deep this year, and not just on left alone looks either. And I think that that's a key thing to point out with a big man is
Yeah.
that he's hitting it and he's not just left wide open. I do think that he defends around the rim well. I'll have to go back and look at more kind of like defending in space, but I would say that that's probably like going to be the biggest area of concern about him translating up. But which big man isn't?
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's like Evan Mobley switchable, but like, I think he's more mobile on the perimeter than maybe like one of the other guys we'll talk about on the show.
Yeah, I see the shots fired in the notes here, so I really appreciate that. But overall, man, I like him a lot as a sleeper. Like, definitely after diving in his game a little bit more, he is certainly up there for me. So I'm glad that you brought him to the table. So I'm going to ask you now about a guy who I have just been like spamming everybody about that'll listen to me about my takes on a guy. Plays out of San Diego State, Elijah Saunders. Now, I like him a lot. I've talked about him a number of times on the show. I think that he's had a good game against Washington recently, had a tough game against Cal. Still hitting the ball from deep and rebounding. He's probably a next year guy, I think at the earliest, but I'm really intrigued by the tools. So, Corey, I'll just turn it over to you. And I just think that he's one of these guys that might be in the mold of like a Grant Williams or like a PJ Washington type guy.
Yeah, and to be honest, like Grant Williams was somebody I struggled with. So he really does remind you of that type of player. And kind of like how you feel about the point guard prospects, where like there's that really thin margin of like, does this work? Does this not work? Like I almost feel like Grant is like the version of it working, but like also it almost didn't.
Yeah.
You know, because there were a number of years where he was just like not a rotation guy. And he was a guy who coming out of college had a lot more of like, had proven a lot more than Elijah. But what I have about him is, one, obviously we're talking about him like he's a Grant Williams guy. He is strong AF. Like this dude is rock solid, right? Like he looks like a bodybuilder. I think that he has a pretty rudimentary offensive game, but I think I don't mean that in a bad way. Like I think he's got a simple game that makes it easy for him to slot into next to like players who are going to take the brunt of the offensive load. Like I don't think there's any mistake in given where he's at in his development that he is going to be some kind of offensive hub. So sticking with the things that you know that you're good at, I think is something that is a positive and not a negative. I do think that maybe he settles a bit too much for his shot. I think the shot looks good, you know, smooth, high arcing, right? He's had a lot of success with it this year. He's shooting the ball very well. But I think he settles for it a little too much. I think for him, like an area where he needs to grow his game because he is so strong, right? Like I want to see him mix it up a little bit and become more of a threat at the rim. Because even though he is shooting it so well right now, I feel like the defense is going to be pretty content letting him shoot it, because it's not like he is like, you know, a Jordan Hawkins type shooter where he's getting up like crazy volume to where it's almost like, all right, fine, shoot it. You know, that takes you away from the basket. You know, you're not going to make any athletic plays around there. So I think that to be an efficient scorer, like thinking at the next level, he's going to have to mix it up a little bit, because he has shown that he can be a guy who can like catch a lob and like, you know, so if he can mix up those screens and the pick and pass with some pick and rolls and like become a lob threat, or like a guy who can, you know, catch a pocket pass and go and finish at the rim, I think that would do a lot for him. I'd like to see him run some DHOs, you know, set a song screen, roll through it. And overall, I want to see more connectivity offensively. Right now, he's very much like a play finisher guy. I'd like to see that extra level added to where, again, he is running a DHO or he's making a pass out of the short roll. things that I think he'll need to do at the next level. Grant Williams is a guy who can do those things, I think. So right now, I think that's kind of the difference there. But I think he's got some passing feel just based off of like the locations of where he puts the passes. He does a lot of high-low passing, and he places the ball in spots where whoever's catching can catch it without having the ball deflected. So I think there's some feel there. There's some potential on that end. Defensively, slides his feet really well. Obviously, he's really strong, so you can't really bully him. But I also don't think he plays with as much physicality on that end as you would assume, like getting into guys' shirts, taking away their space. He's just somebody who kind of stays solid and like uses his length and anticipation to contest, which is fine. But I think sometimes I'd like to really see him be physical and like get a little more aggressive. I see the vision. Really good college player right now, solid prospect. And I think that, like you said, next year would be a year where it's like, can he grow his game and add new elements to it to where it's like, now we're really seeing a more well-rounded player. But like, I do think like the vision is there for that.
Yeah. And I think too, a big thing that I'm waiting for is if he stays there, Liddy will be gone. And Liddy is just wrecking college basketball right now on that very same team and has the majority of his touches like coming around the basket. Right. So that'll free up some different looks for him, hopefully. But yeah, I just want to get more eyes on him because he pops off on so much like statistical queries of NBA players that have like panned out in the NBA. So just a guy that like has really popped out on me. I appreciate you checking him out and giving me the notes on him, man. Let's go to a guy who is going to show up on our exercise for next week. A name that is circulating throughout a lot of scouting circles. Pretty new to me though. Donovan Dent out of New Mexico. Corey, how did you come across this name when bringing him to the table?
Yeah, so initially we had somebody else, and I was like, you know what, that player had like people have talked about him a little bit. Like, let's get this guy's name into the ether a little bit more. Also, he's a guy who I had an NBA front office guy text me. Like, I woke up to a text in the morning that was just Donovan Dent, New Mexico, in all caps. So I was like, all right, like let's pay a little more attention to Mr. Dent. So he's a really fun point guard prospect, especially if you like guys who can really pass the ball and like, and get guys involved and are really crafty and have a little bit of like wiggle and play with pace. And so he's really fun. So 42.2% assist percentage, 14.4% turnover percentage. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty not bad.
That's a good ratio for the fans out there.
Yeah. I think he's one of the best playmakers in the class. I love how he uses eye manipulation to trick defenders. So like an example at the start of the second half against St. Mary's, he drove baseline. He had the corner shooter open. He looked at the corner to get the weak side help to kind of drift that way. And then midair just dropped off to the cutter in the lane. It was just like a super high level read. And like, even if he had made the read to the weak side corner, which would have been like the right read, it still like wasn't impressive as him making the drop off for like an easy, high efficient 2-point dunk. He's a guy who can make jump passes and you don't think he's like out of control by it. Like, he uses it as a skill. He can paint the corners. He drops balls off. He hits pocket passes. He'll hit over the top. In the open floor, he has really great end-to-end speed, super fast, excellent handle. He's got that boogie, that wiggle. And I think that allows him to kind of get himself into tough spaces and then improvise a little bit. I think Malik Mack has a little bit of that too, where, the guys with the creative handles, they can kind of get themselves out of trouble a little bit sometimes. So I think he has that. I love how he operates in the mid range. Like, he is just super smooth, super efficient dude in that spot. And I think one of the more underrated skills of being a playmaker is the ability to operate the pick and roll and then get to the elbow and knock down mid-range shots, because that elbow opens so many things up. Because now if you can get to that spot, like, and look at a guy like Chris Paul, who is all of 5'10 or 5'11, and has still been able to become an effective NBA player almost into his 40s because he can get to that spot and then he's able to make plays out of it. So because he can knock that shot down, if somebody's going over the screen and they're trailing over, now the big has to step up, right? Because you don't want to give up that easy elbow shot.
Yeah.
What happens then, right? Now you have easy drop off opportunities, pocket pass, lob, whatever. Now, let's say that teams get hip to that, right? And that, what do? Now you send the low man weak side help to come tag that roll. What can he do? Now he can hit that weak side corner and you're giving up a three. So it's such a special thing and it's such an easy thing. So like, it's something that I think point guards need to kind of add to their game. The 3-point shot is a really fun shot, but just having that elbow spot in your bag where you can just come off the screen, 1-2 dribbles, rise up into that spot. If you can knock that at an efficient clip, it'll open so much for your playmaking. And I think that's something that Donovan Dent is really, really capable of doing. I do think he needs to extend that shot out to the 3-point line at volume. You know, with as important as that shot is, that is a weakness in his game where he has to prove that he could shoot that thing efficiently from behind the arc, because so much of this game today is predicated on threes, and he's probably not going to be a guy who is the engine like he is at New Mexico. He's going to have to probably learn to play off of other guys too. Not to say that he won't get his share necessarily of, you know, running offense and getting, you know, guys into sets and stuff, but like everybody's so good in the NBA that you're going to have to share the floor, share the ball, and being able to spot up, knock down shots off the ball is going to be an important thing that I want to see if he can, you know, kind of do the rest of the year. He also needs to get a little bit more efficient at the rim. I do think he's crafty there. Like he finishes with underhand scoops, you know, like he has like offhand finishes, but at the end of the day, he's like a somewhat small guard. So he does need to finish at the rim efficiently. Defensively, I think he competes. Really strong steal and block percentages over, you know, a year plus span. He's good on an island. He's sound off the ball, but even still, he's a small guard. I think he'll struggle with bigger guards and wings at the next level for a lot of the same reasons that we talked about with Malik Mack. You know, he'll die off screens, you know, stuff like that. But he's the guy who kind of reminds me of Aaron Brooks, which, you know,
I love
long NBA career. Yeah. Long NBA career. Better 3-point shooter, Aaron Brooks. But, you know, Donovan Dent is a young player still. See if he can add that to his bag.
For sure. Yeah. So in my notes on him, obviously love the passing vision. Does it look like his shot, the shot looks like it curves a little bit on the release, at least to me. Does it look like that to you, or am I crazy?
I saw that in your notes, and you know, I didn't get an opportunity today to go back and look at that. But there is something funky on him, like trying to compensate for the extra distance on the long range shots and compared to the middies, because like in middies you typically elevate a little bit more than you do from deep, right? So I think him compensating maybe more with upper body can lead to that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, it was just like a weird thing. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I wrote that he's not scared of physical play. He's a blur in transition, can switch hands-on finishes, which I love that he's not just like a one-trick pony when he gets to the rim. Passing out of pressure, I think, needs a little bit of work. Kind of similar to what we talked about with Mac. I just think that both of them in this regard, like sometimes just get into trouble where they don't know what they want to do next. But I do love his process for shooting the passing lanes on the defensive end. Do you think that he's probably going to be like a one position defender, which is totally okay, just so long as you're a competent one position defender? Back to the offense, I do think that one thing that stands out about him that I loved a lot, didn't even talk about it with Mac, but he has it too. I think for these point guards, man, like the deceleration that they have whenever they're attacking, to just keeping the defense on their heels, which can free up that mid-range pull-up that you were speaking about earlier.
Like Jalen Brunson type stuff.
Exactly. I think that he has a nice foundation to him as a draftable player. I just, like, what is separating him, and this is just me, what is separating him against a guy like Hubbard or Lipsy in this class? Because I do feel like some of these guys have a little bit of similarities and carryover.
Well, I think that's probably the story of this draft, right? Like,
yeah,
so many guys are right in that same kind of range, same kind of skill sets, and it'll all come down to like who can produce the longest, the most consistently, who's going to come out of the draft, who's going to go back to
Fair.
school, and right,
Yeah.
who performs well in one workout versus the next, like, so I think there are a lot of external factors that we might not be at in that part of the process yet even.
That's totally fair and definitely a real part of the process that we got to remember. I'm just thinking like on the play, on the season so far, what I've seen on the court, like there's some similarities between them, but Donovan Then is definitely a guy that like I wasn't coming into the season thinking that I needed to take seriously, and now I do. Right. So Corey, we'll go to the last guy here. Sam Vecini, who has been in the draft game for a long time. A lot of people know that. I saw that he's releasing his 100 players, and he has this prospect at 70, which is currently higher than where I have him, even though I like him a lot. Quentin Post out of Boston College. I've been watching him throughout the year, just like you. I run these queries, and I ran him up against like some pretty highly regarded big men, and like the numbers are kind of fleshing out to be the same. Quentin Post, he's 7 feet out of Amsterdam, which makes him cool to me, shooting 50, 50, 90 from the floor, giving you about 2.5 assists and blocks per game. Like, what do you think about Quentin?
Yeah, I watched him up close last year. I went to see Traquavion Smith take on BC, and Post definitely stood out. Like, being so close to him, you're like, oh, it's just a giant human being. And so those guys always stand out because
Anybody want a peanut? Yeah.
I'm not giant. So that was the first thing. But I like him. I actually, I have him at 72 on my board right now.
Okay.
I think when you look at him right now, like he had a possession against Vanderbilt about 17 minutes in the second half where he got vertical to block a shot at the rim without fouling, and then came down the floor and walked into a pick and pop three. And to me, that's kind of like the quintessential, like, what does this dude bring to your team? He can go get it done on the defensive end, and then he can also space the floor and do some stuff on offense. So I love that, like, has such a smooth shot, is not afraid to let it fly. He's already tall, but he's got like a nice high release, like to make a pretty unblockable, hard to contest shot smooth. He could pick and pop. Real gravity as a shooter allows him to attack closeouts. And, what I like about him is that, like, he can actually like drive and kick off of the closeout at like outside of finishing. Like he's got pretty good vision. He'll hit cutters. He leads into the spot. So he's got that fun passing aspect. I think that he's like, pretty good in the post. He's got good footwork, very fluid. He can turn middle, finish with a strong hand. He can go opposite, finish with his weak hand. I don't know if he has like the best touch around the rim, but it's like adequate enough. Right. Like I do think that for like a 5th-year 7-footer, he's not as strong as you like would hope he'd be at this point. Like I think he struggles to move bigger guys. I don't know how big of an impact that would have at the next level,
Sure.
Because I don't think a team is, if he steps on an NBA floor, is gonna be like, you know what? Why don't you go at Joel Embiid on the block here? Like,
I mean, that's a measuring stick that you test the center strength against, is can they go up against Embiid and Nikola Jokic?
So it's probably not like super big deal, and obviously he'll continue to get stronger the more work that he puts in. Defensively, I do think that he's probably reserved to be like a drop big, but BC does use him at the level sometimes. And I'm not sure it translates to the next level when you have like consistently quicker, shiftier guard play, but it's something that BC's doing, so he has experience with it, and I'm not going to rule it out because I've seen him do it, even though it's not something I would say that he needs to do consistently. But for as fluid as he looks at times, sometimes I feel like his feet are a little heavy, especially like when he's closing out. He's not somebody that you're going to be like, oh, look at those choppy feet on the closeout where he's sitting in his sitting in his stands with a high hand. But he's a fluid dude. He could shoot. He's almost like bargain bin Kyle Filipowski in a lot of ways, is how I kind of look at him in this draft. So I like him a good bit. He left an impression on me when I saw him last year, and he's been even better this year. So he's definitely a guy to keep on your radar.
For sure, man. Yeah. That's the thing that stood out about him to me was like he moves better than you think that he would at his size. Like you spoke to how he can drive and kick. It's crazy, like how he'll up fake someone on the perimeter, put the ball on the ground, and still be able to finish at his size. And you talk about the strength. I'm with you. I think that he's going to get like that European strength knock that just almost always seems to be there. But I just think that he makes up for it in a lot of ways with, obviously his size, but the level of feel and skill that he has too. The stride and fluidity just stands out so much to me. I love the passing vision too that he has. He just makes like smart, crisp plays. He's not going to throw like these Harrison Ingram from the block opposite corner over his shoulders or anything like that. But you trust him to string a play along, right? Which
he does it from like the top of the key, like and like horn sets, stuff like that. Like I think he'll hit cutters, and, find guys in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the point that I want to make is that the NBA will run offense through big men all the time so they can get these guards and wings open. And when you have like that obvious height of eye advantage that he has, that just gives you so much more utility in today's NBA. Gets after the glass too, as you could imagine for someone of his size. I just think, man, that he is. We talked about the defense. I won't get into it too much. It's just he doesn't leave his feet much on the defensive end. He's using his tools. I much like you, I think that he's pretty comfortable playing in the drop, and I think that's going to be where he lives. I think that he could be like Luke Cornett in the NBA, which is not going to be like the sexiest draw, right? But I mean, that's like a multi-year NBA player, and that has to have value, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and especially if he innovates with some kind of defensive closeout technique like Luke Cornett did.
Yeah, maybe he jumps backwards at the guy. I don't know, just with like something cool painted in his hair that just scares everybody like a butterfly. That would be awesome. All right, so Corey, we're gonna do the one for the road. Kaiza in the chat asked, and I think that this would be like a very cool, fun, appropriate way to close out the show. He says if it's not too much to ask, he wants to know what each of our top 10 are. We can do top 5, if not top 10. I think top 5 would be fun, just to kind of close out the show.
Because we give our No Ceilings Plus subscribers access to our big boards. So if you do want to see our full individual big boards, you can subscribe to No Ceilings Plus at NoCeilingsNBA.com. So I think giving a preview with our top 5 is a pretty fair way to handle this.
Yeah, for sure. And just again, we put out so much on No Ceilings, just like the standard subscription. You're always going to get that, but I've just enjoyed the ability just to go in. Corey, I don't know if you've seen this, but when you go and update your board, like I'll see like these anonymous like people in there just looking at that stuff, and I'm like, oh man, I'm being scrutinized right now. It's a fun interaction. But let's go ahead, man. Who do you have in your top 5 right now?
Okay, I have. Should I go 5 down? I'll go to build anticipation.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, so at 5, I have Cody Williams from Colorado. We talked about him a little bit earlier. He's really impressed me. I like his combination of size and fluidity and ball handling and passing. I think there is potential for him to at least shoot it a little bit because I like what he's got going up top, even if I don't love the base. At 4, I have Alex Sarr. At 3, I have Jacoby Walter. 2, I have Nikola Topic, and 1, I have Stefan Castle, and I think it's very close between the 1 and 2 for me.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, so like you all go 5-1. Someone asked about this guy earlier. He's 5th for me. I have Ryan Dunn at 5. And one of the things that I mentioned in our exercise, man, is and again is that going to be available for No Ceilings Plus people, or is that for everybody?
What?
The video version of what
the video is going to be for No Ceilings Plus.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna want that especially for the Draft Sicko audience. We're talking about like you could either watch Lord of the Rings or you can watch our draft mock draft that we did. So just for you sickos out there, you're gonna want to subscribe to No Ceiling Plus to get that. But Ryan Dunn was a guy that I brought up and was just like, this guy isn't even like that good at offense, but he's leading a D1 program in scoring right now. And he hasn't even figured out like everything that he can do on the offensive end. So I have him. I see Wesley in the chat. Are you worried about Ryan Dunn's offense? For the team that we took him to, not at all. Like I think that they're going to keep it simple for him. But the
Also,
defense
like
is just
Virginia players typically don't score a lot. You know, like
absolutely.
I think they typically have a little bit more in their bag than like the system allows.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. We talk about the shot, Corey. You brought up a great point. Is that the form looks way better than what the numbers are indicating. I love the slashing that he gives, and just everything that he does is like based on effort, feel, and timing. And I think that that typically translates up. And I think that once an NBA team gets their hands on him, he's just going to be one of these guys that just takes leaps in his offensive game moving forward. At number 4, I have Nikola Topic. At number 3, I have Stephon Castle. I have Alex Sarr at 2, and then I have Jacoby Walter at 1. Don't at all love like looking at this every time and just thinking like, wow, okay, like this is who I have here. This is who I have here. I mess with it all the time, but I just I that's where I'm living at, man. And I know that we got some pretty unique omissions in our top 5 that people are going to be able to get a chance to hear about why we feel the way we do when this exercise drops. But Corey, man, I just want to thank you for your time. Thanks for joining me, man. Like it's always fun whenever I get to link up and talk shop with you, man, because you're not just blowing smoke or anything like that, but like highly value what you bring to the table for the team and your scouting eye that you have, man. So appreciate you coming on here at on Draft Sickos. But let's take some time to share some of the stuff that you got going on, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking me to come fill in for Maxwell. Big shoes to fill when it comes to covering psycho prospects. But I had a lot of fun, man. This was, brought me back to like 2020 draft cycle when we would just, chop it up like long form style about the draft like this. So for my first appearance on Draft Sickos, this was a hell of a lot of fun. I'm writing about Tyler Kolek. Not this week. I think next week, maybe the week. I don't know what the schedule is, but I'll have a piece on Tyler Kolek at some point. I'll probably write for the No Ceilings Plus subscribers. I'll be writing another scouting notebook from some of the events that I've seen lately. After I see North Carolina in UConn, hoping we get a Stephon Castle game there. And
that'd be nice.
Yeah, just doing some video work. We'll have some film sessions. I'm doing a Ron Holland film sesh for the No Ceilings YouTube channel. Don't know when that'll be out, but it will be out soon. So yeah, got some stuff cooking on the back burner too.
There you go. Corey's always working, even when it looks like he's not. That's whenever he is his deadliest, right? So, as for myself, I just finished up a really fun player interview, and if it sounds like I'm trying to sell it, I'm genuinely not. Like, I honestly feel this way. I just got done having like the coolest prospect interview that I have ever done, Corey. Like, I've interviewed some pretty interesting guys over the past couple of years, and Michael Ajayi out of Pepperdine, probably the coolest story that I have ever heard. And if anybody wants to, I defy you, try to look up more information on Michael Ajayi than what I give you out of our interview. It doesn't exist. I learned a lot through the interview just because there's not much on the guy. And we're talking, Corey, about a top 10 scorer and rebounder in college basketball right now. And like no one really knows who he is. So cool story, man. I can't wait for that to drop on the podcast feed. I'm obviously going to be writing a feature piece about him. That's coming down the works. Got some ideas in the old noodle here, but I won't speculate or drop it out because people will hold me accountable. But yeah, man, this has been fun. We'll wrap the show here. Big shout out to you, Corey. Big shout out to everyone at No Ceilings. Shout out to Maxwell holding it down on dad duty. You're a hero, brother. And thank you to everybody who tuned in live. The chat has been live. I love that. Just keep coming back. We love the interaction. And for everybody that's listening on podcast feed, please sure to like, share, subscribe, rate, and review, all of that fun stuff. But until then, we will see you sickos next time. Much love, y'all.